Coverkillernation, what's going on? Time to go back into the discography review that is at hand, and that is the Megadeth discography. And once again, we're not going in any particular order. So if you're watching this as part of the playlist, just ignore the intros and everything like that that don't seem to go in sequential order, because I have done this deliberately because there are a lot of different Megadeth albums that you guys, the fans, the Coverkillernation, have really wanted me to talk about, and I want to get some of those out of the way at different moments in which this discography is being conducted. Now, the album that everybody wants me to talk about, besides Rust in Peace, is the album Risk. Risk was released directly after Cryptic Writings in the later part of the 1990s, and it is widely trademarked by a lot of different metal sites, metal practitioners, and metal fans as amongst one of the worst albums to ever come out. And I actually have a pretty big dispute with that, and it's not because I'm necessarily a Megadeth fanboy. That's something that will become apparent as these reviews go on. However, it's just something that's a little bit more in the logistics, the schematics, and just how everything kind of came around, where I believe that my argument is something that needs to be heard. And not to mention, it's a pretty good case, but let's kind of review. This is the last album that was produced with the quote-unquote classic Megadeth lineup. So this is kind of the swan song, and unlike the Carcass album Swan Song, where it was Carcass's final album, this one for this classic lineup was not perceived or taken very well. And Cryptic Writings, while it was received fairly decently by a lot of people, a lot of fans also felt that the band was starting to slip down that Metallica slope and turn a little bit too commercial for their liking, where all of the raw intensity that was put forth during the 1980s and the early part of the 1990s was seeming to wane a little bit. And it was also stated that this could be seen, and the transformation was happening ever since Countdown to Extinction, ever since the follow-up to Rust in Peace. But with Risk, there was an album by Megadeth where it was completely experimental in nature. Whereas Cryptic Writings still retains some of the core values that the band was attempting to keep around for Cryptic Writings, or from the past, should I say, that they were able to include on Cryptic Writings, along with some new little ideas thrown in there on the side, and that more commercial or radio-friendly glint. Risk was one where the whole entire album was a bold and daring leap. And as we all know, whenever bands make bold and daring leaps, only two possible results can occur. Either one, everyone is going to praise this for its experimental glory, or two, it's going to suffer in like an absolutely improbable and impenetrable wrath from fans that it's going to keep it on worst of all time lists for all of eternity. Unfortunately, with Risk, it's definitely the latter in which that occurred. The one thing that I will say, if I'm going to play devil's advocate on myself, I want to know what the band was thinking during this time period. I want to know what made them kind of decide to dabble into this whole little idea. Maybe in 20 years I'll be saying this about, say, the Morbid Angel record or Queensryche's work or something like that, but for right now, I'm wondering what Dave was thinking, what Marty was thinking. I know that Marty was already getting to be kind of checked out. He was more focused on wanting to go over to Japan, do Japanese pop music, and do other things to kind of push his career to what he would consider to be the next level. There was a lot of tension building. There was a lot of different things brewing. However, this was something that had never really bothered them before until we reached the Cryptic Writings and the Risk duo of albums. And Cryptic Writings, I really think, is actually more of an achievement than it is a failure. Once again, just my own opinion. With Risk, however, you have many tracks that include these very poppy, I don't want to say poppy, they're very catchy hooks, and you know, you have Enter the Arena, which is something that's very well construed, and something that you've heard on the radio and in movies and the like, something that really has garnered Megadeth a little bit of additional attention. Prince of Darkness is another song that a lot of people cite. It's actually one of the better tracks on the album. Time the Beginning and Time the End at the end of the album, a nice little duo of tracks there in its own right, where they kind of take a little two-track approach, something that Megadeth had not really done too much with and really didn't do much with until they penned Return to Hangar. Now, Risk is an album that also, while it does have that catchiness, it also has a certain inaccessibility to it. Almost as though it's a little bit too it's a little bit too much of a experimental package. There's a lot of tracks on here that seem to just be average tracks at best, as far as the songwriting is concerned, bar none with the, firstly. Secondly, it also seems that with this album, there's a lot of lost focus. The ideas on this album seem very, very scatterbrained, and there's even some moments, such as the opening lines of "The Doctor is Calling," that is, well, almost borderline cheesy. And, well, let's face it, this has been a genre, thrash metal and the like, that has sometimes suffered from cheesiness through some of its most important of bands. Of course, Saint Anger is one that everyone will cite to Kingdom Come. However, I also have to cite Dr. Psycho from Annihilator, which just had some of the most terrible lyrics that I have ever written, or should I say ever read, in my days as a metal fan. The Doctor is Calling kind of boasts from that same idea. However, it does transition into a fairly decent song. I mean, that's the thing. There might be parts in this album where it's not really all of that solid. That much I can agree with you guys. However, calling Risk one of the worst albums of all time, I think, is really a stretch, and here's the reason why. I'm finally going to check out of Devil's Advocate mode and get into my arguments. The first argument I make is a very simple one and a very stupid one. However, I feel that it needs to be spoken, and that's the fact that it's right there on the fucking album title, Risk. That's exactly what it's meant to be. It's meant to be something that's out there. It's letting you know that this album is not going to be what you're traditionally used to hearing from the band. Now, this is something that we've seen most of the time with concept albums, where it's going to be a direct link to the fact that it's a concept album sometimes, other times not so much, and also in covers albums. In cover albums, they most likely like to do something kind of inventive with the title in order to let a listener or a consumer know that it's going to be a covers album or also a live album. The presence of the word live is almost always there. It's an omnipresent being on live records. If there are ones that are different, I understand that I am not perfect. But Risk as a whole, as an album, if you kind of embrace it for what it is, if you take a listen and not expect Rust in Peace and not expect Peace Sells but Who's Buying, if you take it for the experimental grace that it is, there are definitely moments on this album that you can get into a great deal. Yes, it is a little bit more hooky, a little bit more accessible in some ways. However, this is something where they were experimenting with a new type of songwriting, and it was something that was starting to work out fairly well. Overall, I think Risk is a often kind of misunderstood record. It's something where it requires multiple listens in order for a listener to understand that Megadeth was taking this Risk allegory right to the very base of the word, right to the very basics of that. And with this album, they definitely did one thing that they didn't want to do, and that was alienate a lot of their longtime core fans. However, for those that chose to listen to this and accept it for the nice, little gems that are included inside of it, whether it be an entire song or whether it be just a particular part in a song, well, those people were able to get something out of this. They might not have gotten as much as they gotten out of an album such as Rust in Peace, but let's face it, Rust in Peace is virtually untouchable. This is going to be one of those paradoxical cases. However, I like this album. I actually enjoy this album. I don't enjoy it from front to back. I think that there is a lot of weakness on this album. However, I would give it a passing grade, but just barely. I would give it maybe a 6 or maybe a 6.25 out of 10. I wouldn't go so low as to call it a 3 or a 4. In fact, I wouldn't even call it a 5. This is an average album, if not slightly below average. However, with the way in which Megadeth is able to make below average, well, it makes other bands' average work, or even some of their above average work, look really good. I know a lot of you are going to disagree with that, and I understand. However, this is an album that, from time to time, I like to pop on. In fact, someone just requested a song on a blog TV about a week or so ago, and it was a nice throwback. So, give it another shot. You might not particularly have your feelings changed by this review. However, at least give it another try and another listen, and see if maybe you don't find something else that, well, maybe sticks out.